We're not awkward. We're not like weird.
Cringy.
We're not cringe. We're not going to be tweeting as if it's him. That's tone deaf and really disturbing. And anyone who does that's like morbidly off.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and my experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stage and television shows all over the world. Shortly after the tragic loss of her husband, Erika Kirk appeared on the Charlie Kirk Show podcast to talk about the future of the program. However, her demeanor sparked a lot of controversy online. Some saw it as uplifting and faith-driven, while others questioned its tone so soon after tragedy. But what do her body language, facial expressions, and word choice actually reveal? Let's dive right in.
Erika Kirk, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. It's surreal to actually be sitting because last time I was standing, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Just to sit. It's a little more emotional.
Yeah. Well, you are rightly at the head of the table, and we're just so honored to have you here. You've been up against so much, and you've been doing an incredible job. The number of messages I've heard just complimenting you and your dignity and your poise and your strength has been overwhelming, and yeah, we're just so glad you're here.
No, I'm grateful. I mean, I know we talked about this, we prayed on it, and we've been very intentional in a way that always keeps Charlie first.
Okay, so a lot to talk about right from the beginning. First off, the moment it starts, as she's introduced, we see her looking at Andrew with a little bit of a tight-lipped smile and a head tilt. In social situations, we see head tilts very commonly in two situations. One is curiosity or skepticism, and the other is in exchanges of sympathy, whether we're requesting sympathy or offering sympathy, like, "Aw, so sorry to hear that." Very common. The research on this is actually fascinating because it discovered that the reason head tilting works really well to convey sympathy is because, for one thing, it exposes the neck, which is very vulnerable, but also because the eyes are no longer parallel, it feels much less like an intimidating glare. It softens the look. So with Erika here, there's likely a request for sympathy, but it can also be her extending sympathy to the staff because they also lost their colleague. Now with this head tilt, we also notice a tight-lipped smile. In this video, we're going to focus a lot on smiles and what differentiates a real smile, also known as a Duchenne smile, from a social smile, also known as a Pan Am smile, due to how flight attendants used to be trained to smile at customers, but it often looked off. So Guillaume Duchenne is the neuroscientist who discovered the muscles that go into a real, authentic smile. You could probably guess that one of the traits of a real smile is the corners of the mouth going up. But the other very important marker is a rising of the other muscles of the face, causing the cheekbones to bubble out a little like this, and a scrunching on the side of the eyes that causes little wrinkles that we call crow's feet. This is why when you see someone actually smiling from real joy, you should be able to see it in the upper face even if you can't see their mouth. You should be able to see it in the eyes and in the cheekbones. With a social or Pan Am smile, the mouth forms a smile, but often the corners of the mouth are a little more pulled back this way rather than going up. And we rarely see it in the eyes or cheekbones. So in this podcast, we will see both these types of smiles from Erika Kirk. In the beginning here, as they're welcoming her, we see a tight-lipped, very social smile, more of an acknowledgement as she's tilting that head. The other thing you'll notice is that her tone is low and her position is pretty closed in. Shoulders are slumped and she's small in her chair. This is a position that we call turtling because it's very similar to a turtle retreating into its shell. There's a lot of research that shows that when we're feeling vulnerable or defensive, we close in on ourselves and become smaller. So all this together suggests that she's starting this interview off in a neutral to slightly closed off state. There are no markers of extreme sadness or real joy. All right, now let's move on to word choice. So there's a very interesting phenomenon that happens twice in this first clip. And it's something we often see in any interaction that has two or more active participants and an audience listening in. So in situations like that, every now and then we see someone say something to this person that they're talking to, but the message is actually intended for the audience. The reason I'm very familiar with this principle is because of my experience as a mentalist and magician. We use this all the time. Like, for example, a magician might bring somebody up on stage and put a coin in a cloth bag and say to the person, "Look, you could feel the coin in the cloth bag," right? That statement is not for the spectator. The spectator knows that the coin is in the bag. The statement is for the 1,000 people in the audience who go, "Okay, cool, so the person is confirming that the coin is in there, it must really be in there." So this type of statement that's said to one person but is actually intended for the audience happened twice in this first clip that we looked at. The first was right off the top. When she was introduced, she said that it was surreal to be sitting in this room because the last time she was in this room on camera, she was standing.
It's surreal to actually be sitting because last time I was standing, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now, if this is something that she wanted to say to the guys that she's sitting with, she would have said it when they first got into the room and sat down. She wouldn't wait for the cameras to be rolling. What's actually happening here is that she's saying this message to the guys, but she actually intends it for the audience to remind us that the last time she was in that room, she was standing and it was a very sad situation. The second statement that fits this category comes when Andrew says, "You've been doing an incredible job. The number of messages I've heard complimenting your dignity and your poise and your strength has been overwhelming."
The number of messages I've heard just complimenting you and your dignity and your poise and your strength has been overwhelming. And yeah, we're just so glad you're here.
Again, this message is said to Erika, but it's actually meant for the audience. This is likely something that he said to her before the cameras were on, not to mention that she's seen the very same messages, she's heard the same messages, but this is a way to let the audience know how overwhelmingly positive the messages they're getting are. This could also be a way to minimize the critics that are commenting on social media by explicitly saying how overwhelmingly positive the feedback has been. So both of these moments are subtle attempts at perception management. They're saying these things to each other, but there's a little message in there for the audience. Finally, the last thing that I want to touch on is something that I'm sure a lot of you noticed, and it's the fact that right at the end, the moment she mentions Charlie, she looks up. This is something she's going to be doing a lot during the podcast. It's a behavior that's quite common in religious people and might explain some of the behaviors that we're about to see moving forward.
I gave assurance to people that Turning Point USA is continuing, and it is. I mean, we are so blessed to have more work than we even could ever dream of. I mean, it's beautiful, and Turning Point Action, full steam ahead, so powerful. All of the other programs within Turning Point USA, everyone knows what they're doing. Everyone has their marching orders. And the show, when we talked about this, became very intimate for me because I was there from the beginning of all of it. And I'll never forget 2020 when literally the world stood still. And Charlie and I would go hiking every morning. And we would just talk about what life, the crazy things going on. And
Okay, so here we're really seeing her body language come to life. For one thing, we are seeing a lot of Duchenne smiles. Her face and eyes are very much engaged. And it happens a lot when she's talking about their work and their mission, and when she's reminiscing about the good old days with Charlie. She's feeling genuine happiness when it comes to these things. Now, there's been quite a bit of conversation online as to whether or not this amount of happiness is typical, given the circumstances, and later on in the video, when we've seen a little more, we'll address that. But for now, just note that these are behaviorally real moments of joy. And the smiles are not the only thing coming to life. We are also seeing a lot of eyebrow flashes. This is when the eyebrows go up mid-conversation. Now, the research on eyebrow flashes tells us that universally, it happens in three contexts very often. The first one is with emphasis. We emphasize with those eyebrows, and it's very often accompanied with vocal emphasis as well. The second one is some sort of social connection or approval, like when we greet someone and those eyebrows go up. And the third is with surprise. So think of the eyebrows as the exclamation point of the face. When something is important, those eyebrows go up. So in this clip, we saw, and we're going to continue to see, a lot of eyebrow flashes with Erika Kirk. But a really major one that we just saw in this clip is when she said, "I gave assurances to people that Turning Point is continuing." This is emphasis. It's important for her to make sure the viewers know that they're going full steam ahead. And a major point of this podcast is to give those assurances and talk about what they have in store, the mission. This would also explain why she looks right at the camera and smiles as she says this. She's talking directly to the viewers. Okay, so her smiles and eyebrows have come to life, but you'll also notice her arm has come to life. Not her arms, her arm. Because moving forward for the rest of the interview, we could see that her left arm is quite animated, doing what we call illustrators. These are gestures that we use to illustrate what we're saying, but most of the time, her right arm is very still. This is really interesting and caught my attention because it's unusual to see someone illustrate with only one hand, especially this much. Like, notice how when I speak naturally, it's normal to illustrate with both hands. And sometimes they're synced, they're doing more or less the same thing, but sometimes we use one a little here and the other one does this. But it's so much more natural to use both hands than to have just one hand illustrating while the other one doesn't move at all. Now, in the very beginning of the podcast, we did see her right hand come up and illustrate a little. And then it went down and we pretty much never saw it move again, or very rarely. Now, a few things could explain this asymmetry, but it most commonly indicates some type of built-up tension that we are seeing on the right side. The hand might be squeezing something or kind of self-soothing like this, but the fact that it's not matching the energy of her other hand and her face and her overall body language is a very interesting contrast. All right, now we're going to look at some scenes that shed some light on the overall dynamic of the group, which might be affecting her behaviors, and I don't think is being talked about enough online. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content, and take a quick second to like this video because it really does help with the growth of the channel.
But not only that, he had a team, still does, all of you, that was the sounding board of that. And collectively, each one of you are a piece of his brain. I know we've talked about this. Blake, economics, foreign policy. Andrew, pretty much a lot of stuff. Mikey, humor, Christianity, sports, youth social, pop culture was Daisy. Like, everyone has a piece of his brain that still lives on. And so what I'm getting at here is the Charlie Kirk Show is not going anywhere. My husband's voice will live on.
A lot of people online are focusing solely on her mood and her vibe. But we could see here in this clip and other points in this podcast that she's not the only one who's all smiles and joy. All four of them are in a very light, often joyful state with a lot of smiles going around. So she's very much matching the energy of the room, of the other three people who are there with her. If she didn't do this, it would instantly seem very odd to a lot of people. You see, we're genetically built to notice incongruity. When things stand out or are very unique or don't match the rest of the environment, we subconsciously take notice. It's part of survival instinct. So if they were all chill and smiley and she was the only one who was all sad and in this negative space, that would instantly stand out, and a lot of us would look at it and go, wait, what's going on here? Something doesn't work. Something isn't matching in the atmosphere of this room. Now, the really ironic thing here is that this ability that we have to instantly sense incongruity might explain a lot of what we've seen so far, but it also really explains why some people were very thrown off by this next clip.
But I want to preface, we're not awkward. We're not like weird.
Cringy.
We're not cringe. We're not going to be tweeting as if it's him. That's tone deaf and really disturbing. And anyone who does that's like morbidly off. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the team is keeping this alive because we have Charlie in each and every one of us. Yes. And it is going to be continually the North Star of the conservative movement, of the voice of the youth, of the voice of the base, and that will not end.
All right, so earlier we talked about incongruity, and sometimes that means when something is incongruent with the environment, but other times it's an incongruity between someone's words and behaviors. And people who are very empathetic are extremely sensitive to that type of mismatch. They notice it pretty much immediately. This is why I believe this moment that we just looked at, and a few more like it, didn't sit well with some people. So if she were occasionally smiling, just in moments where she's hopeful or reminiscent or speaking of faith, I think most people would just let it slide. But here she's talking about how inappropriate or disturbing or tone deaf it would be if they were to keep tweeting as her husband, who's passed on. And I'll grant that there are a few things that align with this idea of disturbing. Like the fact that she looks down and her energy drops a little, and this kind of downwards gaze is often associated with negativity. We also see an eye block, which very often happens when we're trying to keep thoughts out or distance ourselves from a negative thought. So all that is there. However, it's not just that. There's also a lightness here. There's this giggle, and there are these little smiles that seem like smiles of mockery or discomfort or cringe. But if you really look closely, there are little bursts of actual Duchenne smiles mixed in there, involving the cheeks and the eyes. So yes, there's definitely some discomfort, but there's also actual amusement that's behaviorally undeniable. So like I said, this incongruity is often felt by people, and it often causes us to become a little suspicious. Like imagine someone telling you about someone you both know, and they're telling you about how they got fired from their job, but there's this smile, this little smile as they're saying that. So yeah, no, I heard last week that they got fired from their job. We instantly notice that. Now we could sit here and justify why these smiles are happening and why they make sense. You know, is she nervous? Are these smiles of discomfort? Like she's uncomfortable with the idea. Smiles of cringe often happen like this. So we could justify it like that. And we often see people smile in negative situations as well. But it doesn't change the fact that it fundamentally and intuitively feels odd to see someone smiling like this and giggling when they're talking about something morbid and disturbing. Body language wise, notice how at the very end of this, there is a collection of eyebrow flashes. And it's happening specifically when she's saying that turning point will be the voice of the youth, the voice of the bass, and that will not end. And when she says that will not end, it's not just an eyebrow flash, but we see those eyes open up really wide for a major moment of emphasis. This is again her focusing and putting emphasis on the mission and the future plans to keep going.
And the members only will continue to grow, and that will be the tight-knit network of family members that supported and loved Charlie and the team. And that's what it is. It's a family and a team. And this is not going anywhere. It's just not. We need to be able to have people have a show where they can ask questions. Hey, I'm up against this. What would Charlie say? And we play a clip of what Charlie said a month ago, a year ago. We have speeches that no one's heard of. We have interviews that no one's heard of. We have stuff from Korea and Japan that no one's heard of.
Podcasts.
So, I mean, we have so many amazing things down the pipeline that we are working on currently that will
unveil in due time.
I am so excited.
Yeah.
And so,
and by the way, those are things Charlie himself
that he wanted.
He wanted. We were working on some big things, you know, right up until the end, and you know, we've talked about that a lot. Like a lot of the guiding vision that we're using right now to kind of steady the ship and figure out where we're going is the things Charlie himself
100%.
told us where we were going.
All right, so in this segment, she's getting really excited and worked up about some of the future projects and all this footage that they have that no one's seen before and that they're going to use, and that Charlie's voice is going to keep going. And she talks about members, and she, you know, talks about how the members are a tight-knit family. And she mentions the members numerous times throughout the podcast, by the way. But here she's really going into all the plans that they have and all this footage that they have that nobody's seen. And I think what happens is that Andrew notices that it's feeling a little bit sales pitchy. And this is why I believe he jumps in by saying, and by the way, these are all things that Charlie himself wanted. And you know, Charlie is the guiding vision. That, you know, that Charlie told us that this is what he wanted to do. And I think a big part of it is his awareness in the back of his mind that there are a lot of people who watch their program that are not necessarily a fan of Turning Point, but were a fan of Charlie himself. So as Erika is focusing on saying, oh no, you're still gonna get Charlie Kirk footage that you've never seen before, I think Andrew knows that some of the fans are looking at this going, yeah, but that's like his footage, and now you guys are going to be using that. It might feel a little weird to some of the fans. So he's making sure to jump in there and go, yeah, but hold on. We want to make sure you understand this is what Charlie wanted. This is coming directly from him. Now that he's not here, we're just going to execute his plan. It's not like we're taking these videos that he didn't want to release or hadn't released and we're using them. We're just following the plan that he had put in place for us.
I just am excited. It's weird to say excited, but it's also very surreal to say it because I know that God will use all of this in a way that will glorify him, further Charlie's legacy, and Charlie's up in heaven just having...
He's rooting us on. I know that.
He's so rooting us on.
Okay, I believe that to be one of the most important clips of this whole segment. She says she's excited, not for the first time, by the way. Then with this eye block, she says, I know it's weird to say excited. And she opens her eyes and we see a rapid succession of blinks as soon as she opens her eyes. So the research on eye blocking or closing the eyes in the middle of a conversation like this tells us that it's very consistent with focus. So either we're trying to focus on something or we're trying to focus away from something. Like we don't want to think about this thing. And we even see this in children who are born blind. So this is innate to all humans. So it's either to keep a thought in or keep a thought out. And when blink rate goes up, especially like this, like a quick burst of blah, 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 this is very consistent with processing information or emotion. So whether you're thinking back to something and trying to process it, or you're getting emotionally worked up and you're trying to process that emotion, we see these rapid succession of blinks that we call eye flutters. So this whole thing together indicates that she's having some sort of struggle with this excitement of hers. But the key element here is that she's acknowledging that it's odd. She's saying, I know it's weird to say that I'm excited. So this is really interesting. The fact that she's openly admitting this tells me that not only she understands it's an odd way to feel, but presumably she also understands that it looks weird to the viewers watching in. It also tells me that if she wanted to modify the way she's coming off to suit expectations, she would hold back on the excitement and maybe have these little fabricated moments of sadness or grief, or she would try to play more into that side of things. The fact that she didn't do that is a very good sign that this excitement that she acknowledges is weird is in fact quite genuine, and instead of suppressing it, she's deciding to let it out and acknowledge that it's a little weird. You see, she's in a bit of a catch-22 situation. Really think about this for a sec. Imagine if you had recently suffered a great loss and you're going through a bunch of emotions, but in this moment, on this podcast, you're sitting in your loved one's chair, surrounded by people that he was very close to, and you're feeling this genuine excitement. And you're feeling excited to continue his legacy. And you're happy to think about his memory. And you feel connected to your faith. Whatever reason, for whatever reason, you feel happy and excited in this moment. Now, we don't control our emotions, and this just happens to be the way that you're feeling right now. What do? In this situation, she only really has two options. The first one is to give in to this weird excitement and let it show, and then get rinsed online because she's too happy. Her second option is to try to summon sadness or act sad and get rinsed online for not being genuine. There literally isn't a good option for her here. Either we're going to look at what she's doing and go, she's oddly happy, or we're going to look at it and say she's being fake and inauthentic. I guess she chose oddly happy and then acknowledged it. By the way, speaking of her being aware of the audience and public perception, I want to take a second to talk about her speech at the memorial, which we covered on the channel last week. And the feedback on that analysis was some of the best I've ever had in the history of the channel. And I wanted to take a second to thank you guys because I had a technical issue and I had to re-upload the video, and usually that's really bad for the performance of a video because it loses that initial traction. But in the way that you guys jumped in and engaged with the video and commented, it really went flying. The video did really, really well despite an early obstacle, and I have you guys to thank. So thank you so much for that. But there were a few people in that video for that memorial speech who felt that the speech was a little performative or theatrical in certain places. And I think we can all acknowledge that we felt certain moments felt that way, but I think it's important to note that in a sense, it was a performance, right? She wasn't in her living room talking to her friends. She was in front of a giant crowd delivering a prepared speech. It overlaps the performance category. Another thing to keep in mind is that Erika grew up in religious circles. So her go-to examples for this kind of speech that she gave is sermons, which are very performative in nature. Now, that having been said, there's something very, very important to keep in mind. Emotional and performative are not always mutually exclusive. Something can be both emotional and performative. I would know, I'm a performer and a YouTuber. This is what I do for a living. And very often, I could tell you from experience that even if I'm in performance mode, I could feel very deeply emotional in those moments. So if you're watching something and it kind of intuitively feels a little theatrical on a stage, it's good to note. It's good to be aware of. Absolutely, I would never take that away from anyone. But don't throw the entire thing away as being completely fake based on just that. Because it's possible for things to be performative without necessarily being void of all emotion entirely. I know that it throws us off a little bit when things feel a little theatrical, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible for there to be real emotions there. Furthermore, when emotions are chaotic following a deeply tragic event, they'll be all over the place. So yeah, we can ask ourselves questions about authenticity and look at it critically, but it's also to be mindful of the circumstances. Again, I want to reiterate that I'm not defending her. I don't care to defend or attack anyone. That's not what I do. If I really saw no signs of emotions throughout that entire speech, I would gladly tell you that. So were there moments that felt performative? Yeah. But does that mean she felt absolutely no emotions towards the loss of her children's father? No.
I would say, look at the memorial.
I know.
The
Yes.
memorial is the proof point that the team that Charlie put together can do the impossible, and God's blessing was on that. So there were so many prayers, and I know you feel the prayers because I feel them. If I feel them, you must be feeling them like 100x.
I feel them. All of them matter, and we will never be silenced.
Amen.
We will never be silenced.
All right, so here he's talking about the memorial, and we saw a pattern that happened at the beginning of the podcast and once or twice throughout, where she starts in this lower energy space. We see this very tight-lipped smile, and as he's talking and the conversation shifts more towards feeling the love and prayer and all these things that make her happy, we see those Duchenne smiles come in, the energy comes up, and she goes to a much more happy place. She shifts the focus to the mission, the memory of Charlie, and she brings herself out of this kind of negative or neutral place that she was at to begin with. This is her focusing on her mission. This is her focusing on her faith. And keep in mind, she's very religious. So she might interpret, the passing of a loved one very differently from other people who are not that religious. So does all of this explain this constant smiles that we're seeing throughout the podcast? I'll elaborate more on that in the conclusion that's coming up. But first, I want you to pay attention to what happens right there at the end when she says that we will never be silenced. So she's saying we'll never be silenced. We'll never be silenced. She says it twice, and repeating is something she often does when she's emotional or really trying to drive a point home with the audience. We've seen her do it in her other speeches. Sometimes she'll just repeat something that she thinks is powerful, but sometimes in sadder moments, she'll soften the tone and repeat something. So this is very common for her, part of her baseline. But here, you'll notice her eyes are wide open like this as she's looking to her side saying, we'll never be silenced. Now, is this emphasis? Well, there's something interesting happening here. The eyebrows aren't up. Throughout this entire podcast, we saw her emphasize with those eyebrows. We even saw her emphasize very important things by opening the eyes and raising those eyebrows. This is really important. But in this case, it's this glare, and the eyebrows, they're not down. It's not this, but they're neutral as those eyes are opening up. So in the universal expression of anger, the way anger is seen everywhere in the world, you'll notice the eyebrows come down, there's tension around the jaw and mouth, and those eyes, those upper eyelids open up like this with this glare. In this case, we're not seeing all the components of anger, but those eyes opening up like this, they might have undertones of anger, but at the very least, it's like, I am serious. We are not going to give up on this. This is almost a warning, because if you listen to what she's saying, we will never be silenced. And there's some kind of anger or aggression towards the concept of being silenced. So this isn't so much about we're going to keep going. This isn't this positive emphasis. It's we are not going to be silenced. This is a warning to anybody who thinks they could silence us. Okay, so before we get to the conclusion, I want to say this. I know that making this video was a bit of a risk for me, because some people will look at this and think, wait a second, you turn on Erika here a little. What is this? What's going on? To turn on someone would imply that I was on his side to begin with. I'm really not. I believe first and foremost in objective, unbiased analysis, absent of affiliation, absent of judgment. It's a case-by-case practice. I analyze behavior and say what it indicates. I don't have a side. And at the end of the day, it's much more important for me to tell you what I see than to try to suck up to either side. As such, I could tell you what the nonverbal communication suggests, but sometimes when it comes to the interpretation, I need to step back a little bit. My job is to call out behaviors. This person is happy, this person is angry, this person is stressed about this specific topic. My job is not to judge what should be. It's to call out what it is, what I'm seeing. Now, on occasion, my job does involve saying what should or shouldn't be, but that's only in cases where I have a lot of precedence. Like, for example, if in an interview or interrogation, someone hears the name of their spouse and I see signs of like concealed disgust or contempt. I see like these little micro expressions on their face. I could tell you that that doesn't belong there. It's odd. But that's because I've seen people think of their spouses thousands of times. And there's also a lot of research done on the nonverbal communication of couples. But, and this might be shocking to some people, there's very little research done on the behaviors of a very religious woman whose public figure husband was just murdered at a public event, leaving her with a cause and podcast that she's very passionate about. There aren't too many examples of that out there, and I don't think anyone has a ton of experience with something like this. I actually have a lot of experience with grief and loss. When I practiced therapy, my specialty was to help people deal with grief and loss specifically. But if anything, I think that makes me biased because I saw the worst case scenarios, right? The people who were really stuck and couldn't go on, and that's the reason they came to me. So if you look at this and you say that the way she's really happy throughout this seems a little odd to you, I would say that I can't disagree with that. In my biased experience, I haven't seen much of this type of reaction. But, and this is really important, it doesn't mean that it can't exist. And therefore, if you told me that in your experience, this is completely normal, and you've personally seen people focus on faith and love and excitement to continue their loved one's legacy, or if you told me that you've known people who seem happy and strong in public like this, but then in private completely fall apart, I would go, yeah, okay, that's absolutely possible because I know that emotions often come in waves. I would never invalidate anyone's personal experience with grief or loss. Everyone is going to look at this and filter this joy that we're seeing through their own experience, through their own biases. Behavioral analysis is objective. I could tell you how she's likely feeling in this moment, emotionally, what the nonverbal communication suggests, but how appropriate that emotion is entirely subjective. And how you feel about it is none of my business. With all that said, I can't wait to read the comments in this week's video because I'm genuinely excited to learn about everyone's different experiences that might differ from my own. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to look at this and go, it's just too weird for her to be this joyous and smiley and happy. And that's a valid way to feel. And then there are others amongst you who are going to go, no, hold on. I know people who have dealt with grief this way. It comes in waves. She's excited about continuing his legacy. She feels connected to him through faith. And also we don't know what happens when the cameras are turned off. So this is not unusual. I've absolutely seen this. I just would like everyone to stay respectful in the comments. I don't think anybody is objectively right or wrong because I don't think there's an absolute answer here. Different people react in different ways, and all our experiences could come together to make sense of this. So let me know in the comments what you thought of all this. What were some of the more important giveaways for you that contributed to your conclusion? And I will see you on the next one.